initiatives to clean up the environment. The bank has not only been transforming their power source to renewable energy, but it is also actively financing businesses to migrate from the use of oil to renewable energy. Thank you, Mr. Abubakar, for joining us. We also have, as part of our panelists, Dr. Boar is the Chief Executive Officer of Olon and joined the team from the Boston Consulting Group, where he was one of the founders of the strategy firm's office in Lagos. Dr. Boar earned a bachelor's degree from Calvin College, 2 master's degree and a PhD from Yale University, all in history. Prior to BCG, Dr. Boar spent 5 years with the Heirs Holdings Group in Lagos, playing key roles. Dr. Boar also worked in the Rockefeller Foundation's Africa Regional Office in Nairobi, McKinsey and Company, and with World Vision Mauritania, where he managed a USAID-funded development project while conducting his doctoral research in Nigeria for his Yale PhD thesis. Weber co-founded AfriOne, the first ISP in North Central Nigeria. He has served on a variety of corporate and public sector boards across Africa and is also a widely published author and speaker. I must add that Mr. Boar has joined us earlier this morning, and he had to attend to some other urgent meetings. So we have in his place Osayuki Egwasa, a very good friend of Anderson. He's a thoroughbred finance professional. I must say he's been greatly engaged in providing support in enhancing access to energy in Nigeria since the establishment of Olon. UK is a strategic thought partner to the CEO on finance matters as well as the board of Olon. We are happy to have you here, Yuki. Thank you for joining us. We have Robo Ibu. Robo is an independent climate finance consultant providing investment advisory, business development, technical assistance, capacity building, and strategic support to investors, project developers, and businesses in the climate finance sectors, particularly renewable energy in Nigeria and across Africa. He has over 18 years professional experience in climate change advisory services, business development and strategy, deal origination and execution, operations and technical assistance with companies across development finance, investment management, startups, consulting, FMCG, and energy industries. As a climate finance consultant, who established and developed the IFC's World Bank Group Sustainable Energy Finance Program in Nigeria for almost 5 years. He also runs Pilgrims Resources and Investment Limited, a business advisory, investment management and deal flow consulting firm. Thank you for joining us, Robo. We have Lasdu on our panel this morning. Las is the Chief Operating Officer of Empire New Energy. He has extensive international experience from management, relationship building, and business development in various cultural settings with private and public clients. He spent 5 years with a Norwegian electrotechnical company managing development and financing of IPP and EPC projects. As an executive in green energy geothermal for 5 years, he was responsible for business development and project financing, implementing the company's innovative modular geothermal wellhead plants into the marketplace. Lazar's experience from procurement processes, contractual negotiations, market research and analysis, risk identification and mitigation, financing and implementation of energy projects. For he has operational experience from various countries in Africa, Asia, South America, and Europe. Thank you very much for joining us, Lasdi. We would also have with us Engineer Gbenga Jiboye. Is the Regional Manager Lagos region for the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Is a resourceful and determined team player in his chosen field of engineering. He has a postgraduate diploma in electrical engineering and master's in business administration degree, both at the from the Federal University of Technology, Akure. He also holds an MSc in information technology from the National Open University of Nigeria. Engineer Gbenga commenced his professional career at Growth Investments Nigeria, Lagos, where he was a technical manager from 1994 to 1996. He later joined the defunct NEPA. So when Deepo talks about NEPA, I mean, Mr. Gbenga has been there since 1996 as a pupil engineer and posted to EGMI Tamar Station, now EGMI Power PLC. He rose through the professional career path from pupil engineer protection control and metering to his current position. Engineer Benga is a corporate member of the Nigerian Society of Engineers and a registered member of COREN. Thank you for joining us, all our panelists. We'll do a brief introduction and we'll delve into the main discussion of this morning. And like I have assured our participants, we're going to have a very fruitful session because panelists are ready to answer some of the questions we got ahead of this session this morning, as well as other questions that are, of course, focused on developmental issues with respect to the renewable energy sector in Nigeria. We all are aware that more than 80% of Nigeria's power is generated from, some other sources, not necessarily renewable. And of course, we have that heavy reliance on gas supply to power those plants, the thermal plants. And of course, when you don't have gas to power the plants, then we struggle with operational capacity. Despite the huge investments that has been made within the sector in the last couple of years, electricity is still largely unstable, right? And it's interesting to note that, electricity generation actually commenced back in 1896 in Nigeria. So if we are where we are today, then something drastic has to be done about the state of affairs, because energy is very fundamental and pivotal to economic development. So this is what the graph that shows what the installed capacity in Nigeria is like at the moment. Investment in alternative sources of power has become inevitable with a continuous increase in demand for stable electricity. And of course, we need to also begin to think about cleaner energy more than just having energy as a whole, to say that, is it coming from a clean source? Does it harm the environment in any way? And that's the more reason why renewable energy has become the focal point of conversations. When you talk about the role of renewable energy in bridging the electricity access in Nigeria, we know that there is a lot of energy gaps in Nigeria. And of course, some companies have, even because of that, relocated out of Nigeria at some point because it was necessary to get access to power. In recent years, there has been significant growth in various companies and of course, non-profit organizations that are focused on creating products and projects to expand the access to power for homes and organizations. But if you look at it in the final analysis, the share of renewable energy in Nigeria's final energy consumption is still quite low compared to what where we want to be. And this shows that we've got a long way to go in meeting the renewable energy production and consumption targets as a country. The question before us is whether renewable energy will be sufficient to bridge the major energy gaps experienced in Nigeria. Does the government even plan to diversify and increase access to on-grid renewable energy? These are some of the questions we'll be dealing with this morning, but we also realize that there are opportunities and challenges for expanding renewable energy access in Nigeria. The growing migration to renewable energy sources such as solar represents an opportunity for investors in the renewable energy market space in Nigeria. Like any other established markets, there are controversies, there are challenges. There are a number of challenges with developing renewable energy in Nigeria, and this includes the cost of implementation, the long payback period, shrinking profit margins, and of course, there seems to be some level of competition in the market as well. And we need to dissect this very well to see exactly where the conversation is going with respect to encouraging investment in the renewable energy sector. A number of regulatory agencies have also attempted to contribute towards the growth of renewable energy sector in Nigeria. For instance, to encourage renewable electricity generation in Nigeria. I mean, and to accelerate investment in renewable-based electricity, a feed-in tariff mechanism was established by NEC, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, to determine the price of renewable energy sourced electricity that is fed into the national grid. And of course, we also have some other fiscal measures that have been introduced to also help to encourage investments within the sector. There are not enough available fiscal incentives, however, we must say, that are specific to participants in the renewable energy sector. And so it's necessary that Nigeria as a country begins to emulate other countries that have implemented certain policies that would promote development of renewable energy sector. We'll be asking the question during the panel session this morning, what effective policy incentives and initiatives we could adopt as a country from other jurisdictions to improve doing business and promote the development of renewable energy projects in Nigeria. And of course, we have the CEO of Sterling Bank here. Sterling Bank has done quite a bit within the renewable energy sector, providing finance to some companies that are interested in the renewable energy sector. And so we'll look at the role of these financial institutions. Renewable energy technologies require financing to augment growth, starting from the early stage to commercialization. And then the private sector has become more involved in financing renewable energy projects. Development finance institutions being the most active investors in renewable energy, and we have a robot to speak to that as well, given that he's worked with the International Finance Corporation before now. Commercial banks have been considered reluctant, however. So the question would be whether the government needs to really incentivize these commercial banks to fund renewable energy projects in Nigeria. And then we have policy issues and challenges as well. Government authorities have participated in fostering the development of renewable energy projects, especially through policies and regulations intended to encourage renewable energy project development. Initiatives include the one we've talked about already, the regulations on feed-in tariff for renewable energy sourced electricity in Nigeria. There is also the power sector recovery program, the mini grid regulation, amongst others. Have government policies on renewable energy significantly impacted renewable energy adoption in Nigeria? While there is no single approach for determining the most effective policy goals, what policy direction should the government be focused on? We'll be looking at all of these concerns this morning. And at the end of this session, we expect that participants are able to gain more understanding on certain ideas that will assist in proffering solutions to the challenges in the sector. And of course, operators will be aware of the opportunities available in the sector as well and how to tap into these opportunities. So sit back, participants, and have a wonderful session with us this morning. Thank you. So we'll go straight to the questions to our panelists. And I'll start with Yuki from Olon. Olon, as we know, is at the forefront of expanding the renewable energy ecosystem in Nigeria. What is your view about the opportunities and challenges of investing in the country's renewable energy sector?
Thank you very much, Tentokbe. Hi, I think that the opportunities are enormous. For us at Olon, we set up from 2016 to try to tackle both the challenge as well as utilize by leveraging the opportunities we find in this space. One of the key things we need to think about when we look at the opportunity is just the sheer size of the population that do not have access to the grid, as well as even those that do have access to the grid having insufficient power. To that extent, there is an opportunity for private sector to come in and play and provide some service in terms of power provision, and also then be able to reap the economic benefits of doing that. A couple of key differentiators are available in the Nigerian markets today that sort of also highlights why Nigeria is a significant opportunity play for investors who are interested in providing power and then getting the benefit thereof. For instance, if you look at if you compare Nigeria versus East Africa, studies show that Nigerians are more willing to pay for power because a lot of Nigerians are exposed to power one way or the other, whether connected to the grid or using gensets to provide some sort of power. Was on from some of this we have seen is that Nigerians are also having a 2 to 3 times willingness and capacity to pay for power. If you then believe these studies as they appear, then it then becomes obvious in terms of what the opportunity is here. You look at a population of between, depending on what study you're looking at, 80 to 120 million people, potentially just off-grid, which means they have supply, they are using alternative sources of power. And then you look at the other 80 to 100 million that have access to the grid, that perhaps also have challenges in terms of how much reliable source of power they get. So what we can achieve with this opportunity is just enormous. The estimate in terms of the potential revenue on an annual basis, also if you look at multiple studies, shows that it could be anywhere between 10 to 16 billion dollars. That is a sufficient amount of money to sort of arouse interest in this space. So I think when you look at the characteristics, whether demographic, whether economic characteristics of the Nigerian populace, it's essentially an exciting opportunity for us to look into when we talk about using renewable energy as a source of power provision and also getting the economic benefits. We have seen the issue around the grid, and renewable energy has the ability to be deployed in a faster, nimble way, in decentralized manner, and that means that we can sort of electrify community by community, house by house, depending on what application we choose to use. So I think that the opportunity is just enormous. It depends on how deciding to tackle the challenges to be able to leverage the opportunities thereof and sort of make the economic benefits that is available in this space.
Thank you very much, Yuki. I want to come to Lars, and I want to ask whether you really agree with some of those opportunities that Yuki highlighted based on your interaction with the Nigerian renewable energy market so far.
I think he made a very good summary. I think he has highlighted several of the same opportunities that we are seeing. I would like to underline that we are a fairly new entrant into the Nigerian market. We had our first solar PV plant up and running earlier this year. So, but we have taken a big step from learning to now being in a phase where we are both learning by doing, which is actually quite interesting. So I would also like to mention that our primary focus is on the C&I sector. So, power solar PV plants anywhere from 0.5 megawatt up to 3-4 megawatts. And for that sector specifically, we see a massive growth potential in Nigeria. I think this is also supported by various research organizations like Bloomberg's, who are tracking the new installations of solar C&I projects in Nigeria. And there seems to be a dramatic increase just over the last 3 to 4 years. So I think the combination of a massive population, a very large economy, a growing economy, maybe not right now in the middle of COVID, but on a general level, the instability of the grid, and to put it straight, let's say the inability of the government to fix this on a government level for the full population, is really creating opportunities for companies like us to do these types of investments. And I can see from the one solar PV plant we have operational in Abuja, even though we have made this as a straight equity investment, there is no leverage on the project. We are meeting our investment hurdles with a good margin. And at the same time, the client is paying between 30 and 40% less per kilowatt hour than he would paying to the grid. We are every month comparing the reigning grid price to what he's paying to us, and there is a massive difference. So I think altogether, from our side, massive opportunities, and we have already 5, 6, 7 more projects in Nigeria that we are in some stage of negotiation or implementation.
Thanks a lot, Lars. And that's quite insightful to see that, of course, you've seen the opportunities as a new entrant, we can see as well. So I'm going to come straight right to Mr. Suleiman, and I would say, are these the opportunities that got Sterling interested in doing some? I mean, I'm aware that Sterling, for instance, has a dedicated desk for renewable energy in Nigeria. And so the question really is that if we consider Sterling Bank being at the forefront of providing finance to operators as one of the commercial banks in Nigeria for renewable energy development, so what are your reasons for the initiative so far on supporting what's happening within the renewable energy sector?
Thank you, Temitope. I think the case has been made, a very sound case has been made for renewable energy. But I'm going to start by reminding the audience that I don't think it's a charity. I don't think it's an operation that people should view from the perspective of, well, this is charitable. I also think that while we are all dedicated to doing something about climate change, I like to think of this first and foremost as a business. How we got into this was we stepped back as a bank and realized that you couldn't just sit back and wait for the economy that wasn't growing. And that if you wanted to really become an impactful institution, you needed to start participating in the parts of the economy that needed to grow. And everyone agreed that power was a problem. The challenge was that the grid power as we know it was incredibly complex. The complexity arose from the relationship and the contractual relationship that existed between the various players in the sector, starting from the grid itself and how the transmission company was set up, and then to the power company and then the distribution company. So you got to a point where there was some complexity there. But there's also complexity in grid power as a whole. The kind of investment that is required in grid, for instance, to make Nigeria a viable grid as a source of power was so significant that we concluded it wasn't going to happen very quickly. So the next best thing to do is to begin to think of distributed power. And the best bet for distributed power, obviously, is renewable. So we wanted to remove complexity, we wanted to remove the dependency or the codependency in the system so that you have a single source of power from generation all the way to the homes. And people also keep asking the question about cost. In most cases, renewable sources are actually becoming cheaper than fossil fuel. In 2007, the levelized cost of energy for renewable was cheaper than coal in the US. We have instances where there was a tender in Dubai recently where the cost, the kilowatt per hour was being quoted at 6 cents. This is cheaper than any cost you're going to get, except for some of the more really scaled power situations. So this is a very profitable opportunity to solve a problem that can go to the root of impact and the root of the anemic growth that we're seeing, and then create massive bankable opportunity. So it just makes sense, really, to do something about the problem and then benefit from the banking opportunity that came out of it.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'll come right straight to Robo. The development and growth of the renewable energy sector is impaired by a number of challenges. We've heard about the opportunities. Would you say that there are no challenges? Apparently there are. Which of these challenges do you consider the most significant challenge affecting operators and, of course, expansion of renewable energy access in Nigeria? And how can these challenges be addressed, at least in the short to medium term?
Thank you very much, Temitope. Thanks to fellow panelists and the participants. Yeah, so looking at your question, right? I can remember in my previous role, right? We did some study to basically understand some of the challenges, in Nigeria, right? And we came up with 3 major challenges. One around market awareness, the other one about quality, and technical know-how of, solar, particularly solar technical professionals. And the third one was around finance, right? Lack of, local finance. I think more or less over the last 5-6 years, there's been a lot of work around market awareness and even on technical development, But I think one issue that still remains, right, which I think is the biggest problem we have, is around finance. So when you look at finance, in the sector over the last 5 years, you see that a lot of the money really financing projects either coming from equity of investors, either directly or equity, from companies, and again, there's a limit to how much you can use equity to fund some of these projects. And they've been, and a lot of this money also comes from abroad, right? Their foreign currency. And knowing our macroeconomic challenges, knowing our forex, volatility nature of the forex markets, it is really very important at this stage that we start looking at local currency funding, right? So I think that missing link in actually growing the sector is actually having a sizable local funding. Again, of course, I should be careful here. We have a bank CEO in our midst, right? So so again, right, there are challenges around getting funding from local banks. We know the issues around tenor. We know the issues around interest rates, and that's as a result of our macroeconomic environment. So, but I think what we are seeing now is some kind of innovative funding that a number of players in the market are looking at. Having guaranteed products. Like in fact, credit. They are looking at and also they're also working with pension funds, looking at how we can unlock some of the funds in pension so that we can now have sizable local funding. There are also a few specialized funding from a number of BFIs that are also providing that local funding. So I think the key really, right, that we really need to cross is around local funding. How do we get sizable local funding? Let's say 40 to 60 to 70% to basically support what we are getting from equity funding, from investors, and from companies. So I think until we get that local funding right, the growth will still, be very slow. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robo. Thanks for that perspective. And talking about innovative funding, I'll come to Yuki. Olon has had a lot of impact funding on the Nigerian off-grid energy sector. So how can renewable energy companies access finance from Olon, for instance?
Yeah, thanks. I think that for us at Olon, we try to work with multiple financial instruments, and we're a bit flexible in terms of how we look at supporting the renewable energy sector. I think the point that Robo just made is a critical point. I think is a challenge we still continue to see, even for us at Olon, as we try to support the sector in terms of having local financing to support these players in this space. I think that the only way we can do it is for all players to continue to work together to find what level of contributions they can make to providing this, to sort of resolving the funding gap. We sort of play with multiple instruments, from equity instruments because we are essentially an impact investor. So we do equity when we are looking at patient capital. But there are still concerns there in terms of the fact that because our financing are US based, we are USD based, we essentially still do a lot of those investments in USD. We do debt facilities, whether short or long-term debt, working capital, result based, mezzanine financing where we need to do convertibles and stuff like that. We will continue to try to innovate financing solutions as the case may be. We are currently discussing with a local Nigerian bank where we want to be able to create a solution that will sort of resolve the key challenge that Robo mentioned when he was talking about local financing. Seeing that we are essentially long on USD, we are trying to find a way where we can work with local financing institutions where we can sort of on-lend ultimately in local currency to developers, even though we do have USD long base, and sort of use the USD that we do have as a form of guarantee that enables the banks to be able to lend in local currency to the developers. And I think we will continue to always think about these challenges as an organization and working with various partners, find ways to co-create innovative financing solutions as the case may be. The one I just talked about is one we are still working on. We sort of have the blueprint in terms of how we think to tell engagement with our solution and make it sensible. But I think there are different ways in which we will continue to play, and I believe partners will that are sort of looking at this space in terms of investors, DFIs, will find ways to continue to create solutions. Some of those already from infra credit, what their thoughts are in terms of how they want to be able to support the sector. But innovative financing, like you rightly said, is critical in terms of how we advance this space and how we move the sector along. And for us at Olon, we will continue to sort of play our part and our bit in taking on the challenge and progressing and catalyzing the sector, which is a key mandate for why we have been created. So we are open to collaboration as much as possible. We work with multiple parties as much as we can to be able to do our bit in terms of just catalyzing the sector, especially from an innovative financing perspective, as the case may be. We sort of look at opportunities and companies along the entire life cycle of companies' development. So we sort of create financing solution taking into consideration the particular of life that the company we are looking to support at any given time is in. If it requires more of equity, then we look at equity. If it's a company that's already well established, that's making a market entry, that's essentially looking for more short-term debt financing just to be able to deal with working capital requirements, then we provide those working capital financing solutions as the case may be. I think what I'm trying to say in essence is that our flexibility in terms of how we look at opportunities and how we try to catalyze the sector is really important and critical. And on a case-by-case basis, we try to make a judgment call with what is the best and most suitable financing instrument that the company would need and how best we can provide that as a financing partner to enable the company deliver sort of good quality renewable energy solution to Nigerian markets and be able to also get the returns along the way.
Okay, thanks a lot, Yuki. And I'll be coming to Mr. Suleiman right away to let us know if indeed there is a better financial support framework that the government maybe could develop. Let's assume we have, the opportunity of presenting to the government, for instance. There is no doubt that we need to expand energy access in Nigeria and of course unlock the economic benefits therein. So what specific financial support framework can the government develop for these renewable energy companies? You're still muted, sir.
So sorry, back to the question of what the government can do. I'd like to start with what we need to do as private sector operators before the government can then leverage on that. Because contrary to what people think, the government has actually done quite a lot in trying to enable access to power using renewable. So the biggest challenge I face as a lender, it's that a lot of the companies have not yet gone past the venture stage. People are coming into a new market, new technology, new product. They have not yet demonstrated their ability to deliver either technically or commercially, and then they want to do leverage. And the truth is that you can't do leverage until you have that proof of concept and you've established some stream of revenue that will then validate your thesis, and then you can go into debt. So my advice to anyone looking to access financing here is that you must focus on using venture capital or your equity fund to build the market. And then once it is done, what the banks can do is to help you scale. The second advice on that is also recognize that we have seen a significant reduction in the cost of delivering solar power into homes across the world. This should make it viable for one to deliver a solar solution without subsidy. Because for as long as we're thinking of this as something that can only fly on subsidy, there is a problem with that. The amount of subsidized funds available is so limited relative to the size of the market. And the third comment on the private sector side is that we shouldn't think of financing for renewable just in terms of financing the operating companies. We should think of financing for the homes and for the businesses themselves, because a lot of these people are delivering or have a need to deliver the power capability as part of their real estate. And therefore, Sterling Bank had built a platform that allows the consumers themselves to take the financing in terms of asset finance and be able to enjoy the power over life. Back to government, what I would advise government to do is first and foremost to get out of the way. So there are a couple of things government are doing that are in the way. Some of it might be something as basic as the taxes and the duties. And if they get out of the way, that would significantly improve people's ability to turn around the capital that they have. Instead of spending a month or a month and a half extra at the port, you sort of begin to move around. The second thing, and this is my own approach, is do some de-risking. So choose certain projects. The same way we're asking Infracos and a couple of other agencies to sort of offer some risk sharing. Risk sharing has worked, has delivered amazing results in the agri space through NISL. Some level of risk sharing will be a brilliant way to get people interested in funding some of the projects. So for instance, a 20-25% risk sharing by a government agent suddenly improves the bankability of a product. Putting liquidity and sort of subsidy is important, but I think that really comes last. It's only if you de-risk the system, then you can begin to think about that. I also think that individuals should be able to access some funding if they are going to implement a renewable energy solution in new homes or in existing homes. So we could have a program where if you're going to invest ₦1 million in rooftop solar, you can access, say, 250,000 naira in funding payable over 5 years. That sort of encouragement to the individual then not only generates the demand, it also then makes it viable. Not dissimilar from the access to power fund that the World Bank is putting in place, where for every household that you're able to connect to the grid or connect to power, you get some rebate. That kind of thinking, I think, is what will drive the consumer side of it. And what will drive the producer side of it, which is the operator side of it, is for us to leverage on people who are trying to de-risk the sector with a bit of risk sharing. But I'll round up by saying that there are actually far more funding opportunities available today than the operators seem to realize. And that if they actually pay a bit more attention to the work we're doing, they'll realize that there are funding that have been available for a long time that people have not drawn on. For instance, we had a 10 billion naira funding that was put in place working with the Bankers Committee to energize markets. That fund was never fully drawn, even though it is a subsidized fund and has already been made available. And the process is right out there. And now we are beginning to get into the stage where the collaboration between the Sustainable Energy for All, the Renewable Energy Agency, and the banks is creating new sources of funding, and we need people to actually step up for that.
Thanks a lot for those insights. I would stay on you a bit, though, to respond to the one question from one of our participants. Afangide is asking, I know you've talked about the issue you typically have with startups, but he's also asking what are the specific considerations for granting funding for brand new renewable energy startups with interest for rural areas in Niger Delta region?
Okay, for a rural power project by a startup, so we have three things here that are not verified or verifiable. One is the startup itself as a corporate entity does not have a history of performance. The project itself would be a new project, an experimental project, and the market itself has not yet been tested for capacity to repay. My honest feedback is that this is not ideally a bankable project. This is a project at a venture stage. What needs to happen is if you're planning to connect 100,000 homes like A-Solar is doing, for instance, you want to connect the first 5,000 on your own equity. You want to go to the market and show that you can connect 1,000, 2,000, maybe 5,000 homes, and you can show the capacity to pay, right? Because if this is going to be repaid from the commercial pricing, then you've got to be able to demonstrate that first, as opposed to coming into a bank and hoping to raise funding for, say, 10,000 home connection that might run into ₦1 billion. So there is a need to do proof of concept, just the same way you would do for any technical product. If you want to take this new product into a new market, you've got to prove that you will pay back. And then you can come and say, you know, I've done this, I've got this revenue stream. I would like to scale it tenfold. How do we work on that? Aside that, the only way you can get this sort of rural project done now is to hope for some support from government in terms of de-risking, because it's generally not it's not deemed to be commercially viable, not because it cannot be viable, but first because there is no data, there's no proven data to show that the guys in the rural community can afford the power that you're selling and that they will pay in a sustainable manner. That has to be proven before you can then get bank funding.
Thank you very much for those insights. I'll come right on to Engineer Ajiboye. And I mean, according to sources, the federal government plans to spend about $3 billion on the energy sector in the next 24 months with a bid to increase the capacity of a transmission company of Nigeria to, I mean, will power for national developments. Are renewable energy companies in the plan?
Hello.
Good morning. Morning, sir. We can hear you, sir.
The money being invested, the proposed, did not capture renewable energy. But nevertheless, the federal government of the Nigeria has budgeted non-stop of money through rural electrification projects for renewable energy. So some of them have come off grid for the past 1 year we have been commissioning, but they are so-called distributed in the sense that they are not linked to the grid. The purpose why we go to the remote area for this in the rural electrification agency was because of the cost of integrating those communities to the grid outweigh the benefit. The cost, if you look at the capital outlay of doing that, in one of the studies we did, to get a light to a community, to recoup the money, you might spend the next 33 years. So that's naturally unviable. So in that sense, the federal government is only being distributed for that. The community that are remote. So in this new one we are talking about, the money being released to be spent in the next 24 months is to intensify, to stabilize the transmission sector. So the renewable to be sincere is not captured in it. I think I've simply answered that question.
All right, thank you very much. I don't know if that's, well, it's some clarification. I won't say it's bad news from the guys who are operating within the sector, because we've also heard about the opportunities that are available within that sector. So it's good to get that clarification. So I'll come right on to Robo. In preparation for the full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreements, what framework or initiatives or incentives can government introduce to make Nigeria the leading renewable energy supply chain hub in Africa?
Yeah, so thanks, thanks for the question. So when I talk about government, right, I try to look at it from two aspects, right? The best case scenario, we have more proactive policies, regulations, right? Then maybe the worst case scenario, so to say, would be like, having business, as usual. So, so I think what needs to be done here, right? Basically, I think the first thing is around what the government is also doing, already doing to some extent, is to basically deepen the use of renewable energy, in Nigeria. So by the time, we have, a growing market, both across, solar home systems, mini grid, commercial and industrial, installations, then of course there'll be that attraction to now want to do more in terms of now having assembly plants, manufacturing of, components, in Nigeria. So I think what needs to happen is around incentives, around how some of these components will over time be manufactured, in Nigeria as we deepen the market. I think one good example I always, like to look at is the story of India, right? Because I think a lot of what has happened or what's happening in the Nigeria market, we can learn a lot from what has happened, in the India market over the last 10, 15 years. I can remember, when the India government, came on board, right? They had this target of 20,000 megawatts by 2020. After a while, they said, oh, look, this is too small. Then I had 100,000 megawatts, right, by 2022. But after, by 2018 or thereabout, national, even this is too small, right? So I remember that the last target is around 175,000 megawatts. So what's the point I'm trying to make here is that, that government drive, right? To say, you have targets and we have, hard numbers to these targets, and not just having these targets, but at least, there are policies to drive these targets. We know, for example, in the renewable energy, in the energy efficiency and renewable energy policy, that the government has this vision 30, 30, 30, right? That by 2030, we have 30% of our energy coming from, renewable energy sources, right? But again, so those are some numbers out there. We also know, from the Paris, agreement, that if Nigeria government has made commitment to having like 10,000 megawatts from, renewable energy sources by 2030. But again, these are numbers that are out there, but are there policies behind this to basically drive it? So I think what the government needs to do is basically around having the right regulation and policies in place to basically drive this. Because if, we just have numbers out there and there are no policies to drive, these numbers, then it will just be another, document, that is out there. So I think areas around incentives, right? Maybe like, tax incentives can be given to some of the players, in the industry. Things around, subsidy for, subsidy for renewable energy investors. Of course, not direct, subsidies, because I know subsidy, has become a dirty word, in Nigeria, right? But there are ways that the government can actually try to, encourage, investors in this area. Of course, regulations and having the right, investment incentives that would deepen the market, and that will also now attract, component manufacturers to come into the market. So by doing that, right, we'll now be well positioned to take advantage of the Africa Free Trade Continental, agreement, where we'll now be able to export, to other countries. Because if we don't do that, what will happen is that even if we develop the market locally, other countries will come in to take advantage, of the growing market. So basically, government incentives to encourage, the sector, both on the investment side and tax. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robo. I'll come right on to Lars. Do you agree with Robo? Given your experience of the renewable energy sector in Nigeria, as well as in other jurisdictions, and then, of course, you mentioned earlier that you started participating in the Nigerian market within the last about 4 years. So are there, specific policy initiatives and incentives that you think that the Nigerian government should be thinking about adopting to improve the ease of doing business in Nigeria, and of course, attract foreign direct investments into the country's renewable energy sector?
Well, again, we've just had an operating asset in Nigeria for the last 2 to 3 months, so I'm going to be a little bit careful about having too strong opinions about, how the government in Nigeria what they should or shouldn't do. Our first project is off-grid, so we have not been through any kind of a licensing process with the regulatory authorities, so I do not know how that happens. But I think, in our process of establishing a local company, setting up bank accounts, was fairly complex, fairly bureaucratic. We were, I would say, very lucky to have skilled help from Anderson, among others, to make the process happen. The one thing that I see as a foreign dollar-based investor is the currency issue. This is, I think, both for me and for other international companies, investment companies, funds planning to invest in Nigeria, it's a big issue that we have to deal with. So in the foreseeable future, I think we will have to rely on projects where the tariff is denominated in hard currency, in dollars. Not necessarily payable in dollars, because that's something we found out eventually is actually illegal under Nigerian corporate law, that you cannot pay for goods and services between two local companies in foreign currency. So we do accept payments in Naira, but given the difference between the official rate and the parallel market rate, it's a thing that needs to be managed. And to explain these, let's say, structures to an investment committee in a proper, in a professional investment fund is not easy. So I would say, if there is one thing where I would really like to see some kind of either government interaction maybe an international type of banking institution like the African Development Bank or some other institution, if they could try to mitigate the perceived and actual currency risk and enabling foreign investors to do projects that are payable in this case energy projects where a tariff is payable in naira, that I think would be a massive boost for developing and implementing renewable energy projects in Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Lars, and I will stay on you a bit to ask this further question. I mean, you've talked about some of those things that you think government could be doing, especially with your experience from other jurisdictions as well. So the capital expenditure for small and mini renewable energy projects may make renewable energy uncompetitive from a cost and price perspective in the short run, I would say, when you compare it with other conventional energy sources. So how have you been able to address this at Empower New Energy? I mean, this is not just about Nigeria now, in other places as well.
I actually do not agree with that statement. What we find is that the pricing for renewable C&I size projects, again, let's say an investment size from about $500,000 and upwards. I'm not talking about very, very minor projects because that's not our business. That's not part of our business model. These projects are not expensive. The problem is not the cost of the project itself. I would say it's more the access to capital and the lack of capital going into those projects. And that's where, you know, we as Empower have seen that, you know, niche in the market because the projects are too small to attract, you know, separate project, typical your project financing with debt and equity because it's just too costly to establish non-recourse project financing structures. So for me, it's much more about access to capital than that the cost itself is prohibitive. Again, I mean, we do have a fairly small project operating in Abuja. It provides a healthy return to us as investors. We are obviously not only looking for the financial return. We have several SDGs that are an integral part of our investment policy. And at the same time, we're saving the client 30–40% per kilowatt hour compared to what he would have to pay to the grid. So I think that would be my response to that. And we see the same in, you know, other African countries where we operate, that, you know, whether it's a grid tariff or whether it's a diesel supported off-grid structure, we can come in, we can, you know, establish solar PV or hybrid plants. And, you know, people are saving anywhere from 20 to 40% on their electricity costs. So that would be my short response to that.
All right, thanks a lot, Lars. I mean, so much about the financing issues and access to capital and all of that. And it's good that we have the CEO of Sterling Bank here this morning. So he knows there is a big chunk of work to still do with educating people again about the fact that the access is there. Maybe sometimes people are not just aware, just like you said earlier. The other thing is saying, is it bankable in the first place? And then, I mean, a lot of things to do with financing really in developing this sector. But I would like to just let attendees, participants know that you'll be having some polls come up very soon, some poll questions. So you would be expected to respond to those polls. Please, we want to understand your own perspectives about some of the issues that we're discussing as well, so that we have a detailed, I mean, and a robust session. Of course, we'll present at the end of the session the results of the polls. So maybe we'll stay a bit on Mr. Suleiman now. Is there a need for banks to be concerned about the potential risk of defaults associated with loans? I mean, Lars has told us that he doesn't essentially agree with the fact that some of these projects are not are not bankable in that sense, or maybe you won't get returns so soon, or maybe it's not cost competitive, right? So do you at any point worry about the risk of default associated with loans extended to renewable energy companies, especially because typically, I mean, that's the general view that conventional power producers appear to be more price competitive when compared to renewable energy producers in Nigeria. Maybe you don't agree, just as I mean, Lars also tried to make an allusion. And of course, you didn't tell us, is there any risk of default that you're worried about? Thank you.
Thanks. Let me take the big question of, is renewable competitive in Nigeria? The answer is absolutely yes. I think that has been demonstrated across the board. In a lot of markets where fossil power is even cheaper than Nigeria, renewable is beginning to compete against them. So you can imagine Nigeria, where we're still fairly expensive in terms of the price per kilowatt hour. So I don't think there is a question here about the competitiveness of renewable sources. The real problem is you have two sort of risks you have to deal with. The first one that we as banks have to deal with is the operational risk, which is, if I advance ₦1 billion to a renewable energy company, is it going to be able to execute a power project that leads to us delivering power that represents that amount of advance? In other words, are there companies that are experienced and that have proven track record in executing projects? And quite a few have come up of recent. I mean, it's taken a while. If you asked the same question 5 years ago, you would have found very few companies that actually have met that sort of standard. Now, there are more companies that are demonstrating capacity to do scaled project and do it profitably and do it on time. These are all project management questions that if we don't have that capability, then you can be sure that the credit or the bank loan is starting on a faulty footing. The second conversation is, a lot of the renewable energy projects are actually going into places that are currently off-grid. The challenge with that is there is a commercial question of, can the new market, can it pay for the power that is being delivered? So if you can deliver operationally, is the market viable? Can these people afford to pay for the power that we're delivering? And in many cases, people have not taken the first step of proving it on a small scale before seeking to scale it up. The sort of projects that are very easy to finance today are the kind of work we're doing, where we've taken our 17-story head office building and we're wrapping it up in photovoltaic cells so that we can generate our power from solar and power the building itself. We already have a track record of spending a certain amount of money annually paying for power. So if somebody put that alternative power that is reliable and is cleaner and is potentially cheaper, obviously a bank would very easily finance it, because I'm looking at the consumer here being a bank. This could be an FMCG, it could be a manufacturing company, just someone who has a track record of generating revenue and paying for power. That is the thinking that must go in there. If you want to go to, say, a VGC, which is a gated estate in Lagos, and convince people to buy power from solar sources, these people already have a track record of spending money on paying for power. And in many cases, they can be looked at as individual consumers, and therefore we run a credit check on them individually and give the credit against them. So the credit and the lending environment doesn't change simply because it is renewable. Renewables still have to demonstrate the administrative and the managerial capacity to run the businesses that they are running. They need to have a bit of history, and they need to have existing markets. My last word about lending is that the way lending is generally structured is you have a cash flow that you have invested in, and we sort of come in and use that cash flow as the basis to advance your money so you can build more future cash flows. Where there is nothing, and again, despite our best effort, a lot of banks simply do not have experts in renewable energy sitting idle in the banks, right? So they would always exercise some care. That said, if you go through the process that I've described, it's not any riskier than any other lending that we do. And in some cases, it may actually be less risky because of the efforts of non-governmental organizations that are helping to de-risk the process. People like GIZ that are offering technical support for free. The World Bank, for instance, coming in through Sustainable Energy for All and sort of having some rebates. There are programs that actually make it even less risky than some of our traditional lending.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'll stay on that question a bit and come to Robo to give us some perspectives, because Engineer Ajiboye did mention something when he was talking about powering the rural areas, talking about a particular study that was done, and they found that it was going to take about 33 years to pay back. I mean, and this is sometimes the general view. So sometimes renewable energy projects are considered high risk because of the high capital costs required and, of course, the relatively long payback periods. Robo, do you think that these may serve as discouragement to some potential investors? And then, of course, if you think so, how can the renewable energy businesses in Nigeria be made more attractive to investors?
Thanks, Temitope, for the question. Yeah, so I think, regarding the attractiveness of renewable energy projects to investors, Lance has said a lot, about that. And also, Suleiman also, mentioned, some things, in that aspect. So I think, so I think there's risk there, right? And there's some kind of, because of the long tenure and the rest, particularly for investors that are not typically used to this environment, or or doing business, in the renewable energy space. But again, I think part of what needs to be done, right, to basically, encourage them, right, to be around the area of having guaranteed, instruments, right, instruments around, de-risking some of these, investments. Like, Lance said, right, there are a lot of, there are risks. We have currency risks, we have operational, risks, and so there's also risks of of default and things like that. So I think what we need to have in place is around tools that would de-risk some of these projects. Again, there are lots of opportunities and funding globally for things like this, right? But again, it's not left for investors and for financial institutions to basically be aware of some of these opportunities and be able to build the right partnerships. There are a lot of local, national, international DFIs that have first loss facilities, right? So basically, these are risk sharing facilities where it's basically out there to to support projects and and reduce the risk of investors investing in projects, particularly in developing markets like Nigeria. So so I think what needs to be done around this will be around financial institutions and investors basically try to have a better understanding of this kind of risk sharing facilities that are available globally, and see what kind of partnerships can be built with such global funds that might be able to provide maybe 30%, 50% first loss guarantees. Then with that they'll be more comfortable with the risk perception of some of these projects. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Robo. I want to remind participants that you can take the poll. Just basically go to the buttons and you will see the icon polls. And of course, we would expect that we hear from you. At the moment, we've not gotten anyone to vote, but you're there. Please take some time and let's hear from you as well. Right. I'll go back to government, right? A little bit about government, and I'll come to you, Yuki, from Olom. What has been the impact of government policies on renewable energy adoption in Nigeria? And then the other following question would be what direction that the government should be looking at going forward?
Thank you for the question. I think that there's been various policies. Some of them you have introduced as part of opening this session today. The mini grid regulation you talked about, eligible customer regulation is also part of it. I think the government direction generally has been to be able to promote the sector, perhaps in terms of pursuing their target of the 30% mix in terms of energy source by 2030. They of course set up the Rural Electrification Agency that essentially has also been focused on driving renewable energy adoption in the country. So I think generally the body language, the policies of government have been positive. I think, of course, on this conversation today, we have also identified certain areas that they need to do more in terms of incentivizing the sector, tax incentive, as the case may be, and any other incentive they need to put in place. There are issues around currency support, at least for the sector and for investors that are coming in. I do understand that if you start talking about currency, for example, the issue will be what is government's ability to be able to provide any form of support there, because then it depends on government revenue. Because Nigeria essentially is a sort of mono economy, its government ability to be able to provide support from a forex perspective is highly dependent on how the global oil industry is playing out at any given time. Relative also, of course, is the reserve base of the country at that particular time. Now, in terms of looking at the question, I think the first question is clear for us. We have seen government intervention and policies and programs that are essentially supportive of the adoption of renewable energy in Nigeria. What direction should they go? I think the direction they should go is also obvious from our conversation so far. There is still a lot to be done in terms of providing support to the sector, a lot to be done in terms of providing further clarity in policies where gaps have been identified. For example, if you look at the mini grid regulation, there are some questions as regards whether the policy is clear enough or incentivizes enough for you to have a mini grid operator in a community where a disco has suddenly arrived at, whether the 1 year revenue, for example, is sufficient for the mini grid operator if they cannot sort of reach an interconnected grid agreement where there is a buyback of power between the mini grid operator and the disco. The question, therefore, is that if, for example, the economics is worked in a way that 1 year revenue is not sufficient for the mini grid operator to sort of uproot its sort of solar facility and sort of move on, are there things government needs to do to take a look at that? And that's one area of discussion. Other areas of discussion we talked about is in terms of taxes. Are there things we can do from a tax perspective that sort of further incentivizes the industry, whether from the investor perspective or from the developer's perspective, to enable them to sort of deploy their solutions? There are issues around the fact that the developers will still continue to sort of import a lot of their facilities or equipment in country. This requires foreign exchange, and to the extent that foreign exchange support is not available or the solar industry is not included as industries that government can support from provision of forex, it also impacts the ability for expansion of the renewable energy solution in Nigeria. So I do know that government will have challenge from a forex perspective in terms of its capacity, but government must continue to take a proactive action in terms of looking at what are these key challenges that the industry and players are talking about that needs to be addressed. What can they do more for the developers to be able to deploy some of the solution? Let's take, for example, the World Bank AFDB subsidy that we talked about at some point in time on this conversation. That subsidy is in place and is available to developers to access on a result-based perspective using a particular amount of money per connection, as the case may be. I think they have different programs for the solar home system as well as for the mini grid operators. The question, therefore, is that in the initial launching of that program, the understanding was that because it was a dollarized sort of subsidy program, people will be able to access USD and then deploy that back into furthering expanding their businesses. What we now see, or what we have become aware of, is that the deployment is now going to be in Naira as against USD. Therefore, developers will get the subsidy as the case may be, but will still have to deal with the dollar availability issue in terms of sourcing dollar to then be able to buy more equipment and go back in expanding that business. So again, I think whilst we understand challenges from government still has a lot of work to do, because now giving the Naira sort of subsidy to the developers puts them in a position where they are sourcing for the USD to get equipment. That is not too helpful from that perspective, as you can see. So government policy must continue to be proactive, must continue to look at what is happening in other jurisdictions, what has happened in other jurisdictions, find out what we can learn and deploy in Nigeria. I do think that we are in the right direction from the government perspective in terms of how they want to support the sector. But of course, because the challenge is enormous and the opportunity is also enormous, government must continue to be a key, significant role player in terms of setting the scene, setting the environment, enabling the environment to ensure that we continue to see progress in the sector. There are various I understand there are various proposals that are currently being made to the National Assembly in terms of ways where the sector can be further improved. These need to be prioritized because energy is critical for the development of any nation. The prioritization of these programs, policies that will sort of further enhance and deepen the sector needs to be brought to the forefront for the National Assembly, such that we are making these processes and making these updates as fast as we can to be able to drive the sector. So all in all, I think taking feedback from the sector, from some of the conversation we have today, some of the points that are noted on this call and from other fora will essentially ensure that government has sufficient information to continue to look at its policy, refine its policy. So yes, I talked about the mini grid, there's a policy, but is it good enough? And what areas, what gaps are still there that can be improved upon as the case may be? And then work on improving those to continue to sort of drive and deepen the sector as we would like to see it, to achieve the objective we are all pursuing as players in this space.
Thank you very much, Yuki, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, but I want to come to Mr. Suleiman and stay on what we're discussing about government. Now, from your own perspective, how can the government incentivize commercial banks generally fund renewable energy projects? Do you think that the commercial banks even require any incentive, any special incentive, I would say? And if so, how can that be done?
Thank you. I guess I can lean on to the last conversation around access to foreign exchange. And that matters because, again, even where you have funded a project, unless you can access foreign exchange, the project then gets delayed, and so you then run into trouble from the beginning. So that's important. I think it's important to identify renewable energy as a focus sector, in terms of having access to foreign exchange, precisely because it fits into both the employment intent of the government as well as the growth intent. So if we do that, it will count. And for the bank itself, my sense at this point is that there is sufficient incentive for banks to lend to the sector. The problem is where the borrowers themselves do not meet what would be the standard requirement for lending. In other words, maybe they don't have the right amount of experience, or they don't have the right governance, for the company that is borrowing, or the company doesn't have the required equity or skin in the game, that sort of thing. And that support could be in the form of risk sharing, like I spoke about. So if you ask me, I think we need to put a bit more effort in ensuring that the operators that are emerging in the renewable energy space are properly set up to be able to access financing. Because there are just some basic things that need to be in place. History of paying your taxes, you have to have some capital, you have to have governance. They're just things that a lot of operators don't necessarily have yet. And a little bit of help for them will mean that they can access funding. But I also feel that the biggest thing government can do today is to stop treating renewable energy as an afterthought. I think that because we have a power crisis, there is a lot of effort towards doing something significant about the grid. And a lot of money has been spent there. But when you think about how much of that could have gone into the renewable energy space, especially if it is leveraged. So for instance, if the government were to put $1 billion in renewable energy space today, in some kind of mezzanine funding or some sort of subsidized funding, it can leverage another $2 to $3 billion. And if you leverage, if you have a $4 billion pot to play with in renewable energy, the impact will be significant across board. So I would say that the government just needs to prioritize renewable energy and treat it with the same level of seriousness that they are handling the power crisis.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I want to come to Engineer Ajiboye very quickly to just tell us what's the role of the transmission company of Nigeria in transmitting electricity mainly generated from renewable energy sources. We've talked so much about the finance. Would like to hear from you some of the technical issues as well. So if you could tell us what the role of the TCN is in transmitting electricity that is generated from renewable energy sources.
Right.
Okay, I think there is a bit of each.
Yes.
Okay.
Please, can you come up with the question again?
Okay, we're asking what the role of a TCN is in transmitting electricity that is generated from renewable energy sources.
Thank you very much for that question. As the power wheeler of the nation, that is the grid controller, we don't discriminate. It's the quantum of energy available for transmission that we accept to the grid. But the major problem the renewable energy we have is, you see, because of the new technology, the quantum of energy required from us to be connected to the grid is high. Let me put it that way. For the investment towards it, I will be talking of about 10 megawatts, about 8 megawatts to be connected to the grid. Do we have this quantum of energy coming from any source of renewable energy, either combined or isolated? No, for now. So the cost of investment for the point of coupling actually outweigh the revenue or the generation. You know, as everybody has been talking of finance, it's business. It cannot be as usual when government is funding everything. If what I'm going to invest to accept you does not what I want to accept, I don't know anybody who will be willing to go into that. That is just it. But if the renewable energy producer want to do all the investment, the grid is open. What we need to do in the TCN is the simulation by the system planning. Okay, we can take you from this area, run your power line to this environment, then we can accommodate you. It is just as simple as that. It's what we extend to all other modular generation in the country. Most of them you don't hear. They have 50 megawatts, they have 40 megawatts, they have 12 megawatts. But do we have that can come out from any renewable energy? None is known to me to that capacity for now. That is what I think is the only limitation we have.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll stay with you a bit on that. I guess I have a bit of idea to what the answer would be, but for the benefit of our participants, what exactly is TCN doing with respect to evolving to meet the energy demand as we intend to increase access to renewable energy sources over the conventional on-grid solutions? I mean, you've talked about the fact that if they don't generate as much as 10 megawatts, for instance, it doesn't even make technical sense to begin to look at transmitting power on their behalf. But are there things that the TCN in itself needs to do in terms of evolving within its operation to support renewable energy sources, given that, of course, they have lesser capacity to distribute and transmit?
No, I cannot say categorically, but from the point of operation, we as a power wheeler don't get involved in either subsidizing or supporting. It's whatever you bring to the table that we accommodate. And we don't have any preference for anybody, either fossil, renewable. So it is the energy. We don't want to know the source. The moment we do the simulation and we're able to affect you in any way, we will tell you the location because of exigency that the system is running the grid. So categorically, we don't favor anybody. As I've told you, we accept all generation. If the renewable are ready to join us, like what we have looked at, we are looking at windmill. We have seen in Europe where they are integrated into the grid and they are functioning well. But the cost outlay, initial cost outlay is very high, whereas the running cost is very low, if nothing, because that's the way we see. But as a policy, we don't have any favoritism against anybody or for anybody. So what we do is we wait. If you come, we analyze it and we do our study. That is all. So it's not as if, like all the generation, You know, we are all, just a grade. We should not favor anybody. We accept you. Even if we bring you in and the disco are not ready to take the supply, we have to shut down. Because as at now, we don't have the capacity to stop. So it is whatever the disco are demanding from us that we require from the GENCO. So also if you come upstream, what I know, if your running cost is low, maybe you will be giving preferential treatment because the energy you'll be giving will also be cheaper. In that case, you will have a benefit, a cost advantage benefit over other. That is when I think you can benefit. You just have to come and the per kilowatt hour of energy you are going to sell, if it's ridiculous, if it's cheaper, not ridiculously cheap, let me put it that way. If it's cheaper, everybody will look at you. That are a better option than the people that are too exorbitant or expensive.
Thank you very much, sir. Some good insights there. I'm beginning to think that the technical issues are probably the least of the issues. I guess the issue for me, as I see it, is the interest in the sector. Is government making the focal point rather than just, trying to support what's happening with respect to conventional power sources? Can we have government focus a bit more on renewable energy and whatever support that they want to give with respect to getting power to people? Go through whatever we can do within the renewable energy sector. So I'll come to you last very quickly as a wrap up the session. Electricity in Nigeria is still largely unstable, despite all of the investments in the power sector in the past. And we've seen what Mr. Ajibwe said to us, that, the transmission company of Nigeria, for instance, is ready to transmit. Sometimes we also know that generation is there to generate, but exactly where exactly is the issue? But again, we have heard that consumers are ready to take on the power and they are ready to pay for power. So investment in alternative sources of power has become inevitable, regardless of all that we've said. So to what extent do you think that renewable energy could bridge the major energy gaps experienced in the country today, given that, of course, what you've done is just one? Are you willing to do more? Do you think that would bridge the gap a lot more? And where do you see things going in some 2-3 years from now?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question, Temitope. Okay, I think let me just take one step back and explain a little bit about our Empower's business model. What we do is, we do not believe in setting up large offices in every location where we operate around the world. So we typically have a partnership approach where we work closely with local developers, whether it's in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Egypt, or other places where we are present. So the way the system works is that we will work closely with a local developer who has a project. He will come to us with a proposal. We will go through the proposal. We will see that, yes, this seems viable. Typically, again, C&I projects for factories, for farms, for other commercial entities. And we will then make a developer partnership agreement with that person or that entity, where there will be a provision of a development fee for developing that project. We will have to take it through 2 separate approval processes in our investment committee, and the developer will be responsible for uploading all the documentation required for the project to our cloud-based due diligence platform. This is for ESG, for KYC, for technical, for legal, and of course we will do our own due diligence with our technical partners, legal partners, and financial partners. Typically, that developer will also be the EPC contractor and also the operation and maintenance provider. And we see that this is a model that works very well. We're obviously very careful about the parties that we work with. So one of the topics, Temitope, that you mentioned earlier, this is how we work. And yes, developers can come to us with viable projects and we will support them throughout the process, and they will get a development fee. They can potentially get an equity stake in the SPV operating the project and a few other things. So now how this model can impact the larger situation in Nigeria remains to be seen. And I think for the next 2 to 3 years, we will definitely do, if I were to put a number, we're probably going to do somewhere between 10 to 20 different projects in Nigeria, ranging from about 0.5 megawatt up to local utility scale projects of around 10 to 12, maybe up to 15 megawatts. That is not a lot looking at the total need in Nigeria, but I think it's a step in the right way. It's a combination of bringing down electricity costs for the people that we work with, for the off-takers, and it's also about, you know, reducing pollution to the atmosphere from hopefully replacing fossil fuel diesel generators with renewable energy sources. So again, I think Nigeria has a massive potential, not only for us, but for other players in the sector. But there are some prohibitive factors where, in my opinion, the biggest one is the currency situation. So I'm not sure, Temidope, did that summarize?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lars. That helps a lot. We're gradually wrapping up the conversation. I mean, this conversation is getting, for me, very much more interesting. It's as though the conversation should continue. Got a lot of contributions as well as questions from our participants. We won't be able to take them, but I'm sure that our panelists will be willing to give those answers, and we can post them to you via your email address if you've registered for the event. So again, it's been a wonderful session, and we just have about 2-3 questions to close the session, and of course, get the final comments from our panelists. I would like to come back to Yuki as we close the session. The feed-in tariffs has been very successful for the expansion of renewable energy access and making renewable energy price competitive in other jurisdictions. What role do you think that the regulations on feed-in tariffs in Nigeria would play in making renewable energy the preferred source of power from a cost and price competition perspective?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think the question assumes, though, that the feed-in tariff, the grid, as it were today, operates as it ought to, which is essentially that people provide some sort of energy into the grid and they get compensated. If you do have that, then we can focus on the feed-in tariff. I think for me, the way I would try to look at that question is to, first and foremost, I think we need to dial back just a little bit and focus and ensure that we do have an efficient grid in terms of how it operates and works. So everybody across the value chain, from the Genco to Transco and Disco, do get their share of the revenue generated from the activities and value that they create. When you do have that, then you can have people encouraged. If not, I think you can design whatever feed-in tariff you want to design, but it does not necessarily motivate people to feed into the grid. I think people are more comfortable in their distributed off-grid space where they can power a customer, a community, a household, an estate, whatever they want to power. And they do have the control and direct relationship between the generation, the distribution, and then the supply of that power to the end consumer, and then can receive their payment as the case may be. But if you do have the grid actually working where there are no significant concern around revenue losses, whether from a technical perspective or just from an operational perspective in terms of energy theft and the likes, then you can then focus on what can we sort of learn from other jurisdictions where feed-in tariff has been applied. Are people encouraged, when people sort of in certain jurisdiction, you're encouraged to provide sort of a feed-in into the grid. By doing that, you do get some tax rebate, and that's essentially has motivated people to do that. For renewable energy, I think we've already talked about that, the fact that renewable energy, as we know today, is essentially competitive. There is also, if you look at studies in terms of the next 3 to 5 years, there's also the intention to further reduce pricing in terms of the cost of this equipment. I think if you do have a feed-in tariff that encourages people to be able to feed into the grid and get some sort of incentive in terms of taxes, as the case may be. We, for example, have some tax incentive, for example, if you have a life assurance policy today, the same way you can think about it in terms of ensuring that that incentive is available where people can get tax benefits. You could say, look, if you feed into the grid, you do get payment for that. And you can even say, for example, that can either be at a reduced tax rate in terms of your personal income tax when you assess for personal income tax. That, for example, will motivate people to say, okay, look, I can provide power to the grid, I can earn some money, and in terms of the taxes, either at no tax rate, zero tax rate, or low tax rate. So you essentially will be motivating more people. I think that as we see it today, if you also, for example, tie it to source of energy, if you sort of build your incentive around the source of energy, then you can sort of motivate people to go the renewable energy way. But I think, like we've said, the renewable energy way of providing power today is ultimately cheap on the long run. People are concerned about what the cost is of putting it in place today. But once you start to look at it over the period of time for which it provides you power in terms of the lifespan, you see how cheap it is and affordable it is, and I think people will be happy. My concern in terms of the question, I think what is most critical, first and foremost, before we can actually get any real feed-in tariff that encourages people to provide anything to the power, is to be able to at least get our grid to be able to be efficient enough, cost reflective enough, and provide a sort of returns for all the value players across the value chain comfortably, such that there are no need for CBN interventions into the sector, because all the players have not gotten their share of what they expect from the revenue that should be generated based on the power that have been transmitted. But of course, we've talked about losses, both technical and non-technical. I think where they are technical, we need to resolve that. Where they are non-technical, we need to look at what are the operational mitigations that can be in place to be able to also reduce as much as possible those losses. In that wise, then you can have a functioning system available where your tariff, your feed-in tariff policy then encourages people to want to play. And then you can layer on top of that learnings from other jurisdictions in terms of tax incentive that sort of enables and engenders people to be able to provide a sort of power contribution into the grid and be able to contribute in that way to our national development by looking at power provision.
Thank you so much, Yuki. Again, it's as though the conversation shouldn't end. What we'll do as a firm, Anderson, is to continue to monitor events within the sector. And given that this is a maiden edition of this event, we would like to continue to have it on an annual basis as well, to keep people abreast of the development within the sector. As we close the session, we'd like to hear within 30 seconds to 45 seconds, I've overshot my time already, from our panelists, the final words from our panelists. I think I'll start with Lars. And Dr. Bor, if you're able to speak, you may also want to just say one or two things to attendees as well. So Lars, final comments, the outlook. And
I think I would like to repeat the potential that we see in Nigeria. Having the experience that we do from other African countries, I feel that from an international point of view and from international finance institutions, I mean, we are an impact investor. We're not purely driven by profits, but of course that is an important part of our business. Our investors do expect returns at or beyond their hurdle rates. My point is that there are not that many institutions very eager to invest in Nigeria. We see, for example, in Ghana, there's a lot of competition. There's more money available than good projects, and we see the same in certain other markets. So, from our perspective, we feel we have been able to unlock the secret to do business in Nigeria in a sustainable way and at the risk level which we're comfortable with. And we're looking forward to expand going forward, and happy to being contacted by local credible developers in the CNI space.
Thank you so much, Lars. Robo?
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Temitope. I think my last comment here would be around, talking to investors, right? Because in the course of my, my daily work in my activities, I have interactions, with investors, and I always get this, feedback, that they don't understand the sector, they don't understand, Nigeria and all that. And a lot of that perception is actually driven by international media. Sure, We know there are a lot of, issues, and challenges, but again, there are enormous, opportunities, right? So I think we can really focus a lot, on the opportunities to really, unlock the market, and grow the market. And I think one good way to start is basically to know the market, right? So I always encourage, investors, players in the industry, know more about the market, build partnerships, build relationships, talk to experts, talk to players, in the industry, so that you have a lot of knowledge about the industry. Then also finally around also doing some projects, right? Maybe, test the market, because no matter how much you learn or you read about, you really get to another level by the time you start doing it, right? So I always encourage, investors, or even developers to basically test the market, do pilot, projects, then you learn more about the market and you know how it works. Then with that, you're now able to scale. So by the time we get more of such interest, more of such investors and players in the in the market, building those relationships, working on the market, knowing the market and testing the market, then the full potential of the market will really blows up. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Robo. I'll take Engineer Ajiboye now, and if you may, just as part of your final comments, also speak to one of the questions from our participants saying, what's the TCN doing about energy storage? So your final comments, Engineer Ajiboye.
Thank you very much. I will put it this way. This is my own suggestion. For us to be able not to take you for granted, that is the investor, the power should be annexed in location so that it becomes tangible in such a way that we cannot ignore when you call us. We cannot do matching investment, which we will believe will be profitable. But when they are distributed and so small, if we look over it, that is the policy, I will tell you. But if we have a zone as we have, if it's going to be renewable, let them come together in such a way that when we look at the quantum of energy coming in that area, we will not be able to ignore it, because we know right now that it's cheaper. And we are going to benefit from wheeling a cheaper energy than the expensive one. In the aspect of storage, we have to go one step at a time. I've been saying it in other fora. When you buy all this technology, the cost is so exorbitant that it doesn't make sense and it doesn't lead to development. Major thing we need to do in Nigeria first is the government policy that we encourage the use of power. As we have right now, let me tell you categorically, less than 20% of our energy is used for production. It's for enjoyment, household use, office use, that are not contributing to the GDP of the nation massively. When we get to a point when the government policy allow the setting up of industry, you will see we are not looking for energy. It's only that the energy is not going around. We have trapped energy as we are talking. It's not that we don't have energy. We have issue of energy and people cannot pay, and these people are not ready to take it. So in the issue of storage, I want to go this way. It is until we are talking about quantity that we are talking of wastage, that we will say we have enough, let's store it for the day we are going to shut down. But as now, nobody will want to invest in that aspect. It's not as if we are not looking at it. But when you bring up the issue, they will ask you, is it waste? Actually, we have shut down generation. Why do you want to stop? But when renewable energy come on board, and we want to tap like solar during the day, then we'll be talking of massive storage so that we can still meet our demand when the sun goes down. The same thing with windmill. When you have windmill, and we know there can be times that the wind will change direction. We start during the time we have this at the maximum. So in a situation like that, when we have those components are next, that is when we will now be moving into the, now we are talking of reinforcement, stability, quality. It's stepwise. It's after we have achieved all those milestones, we will now be looking at, oh, let us store it. As we have it now, we are still struggling with creating the environment for people to take energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Jiboye. I bet you this conversation will not end, it will continue in that trajectory. So I'll take Yuki, final words on this.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot have been said already. So I'll just say it in a very short way. I like for everybody who is actually looking into this space to remain active, to continue to leverage information as possible, engage as much as possible. I think there are collaborators across the divides, and I think there are opportunities and platforms seeking to provide multiple solutions to people, whether from financing, whether from technical partnership, or whatsoever. But I think that the ability to stay abreast with what is happening in this space and connecting with various organizations that are participating and playing a part in this space is one that is critical for success. I think we've mentioned a bit already about hints in terms of testing and proving your business case, business model before you're able to lever that up. I think an organization like Olon provides early stage financing for you to be able to test some of those, either in mezzanine financing or equity, or through our challenge, we provide at least 100,000 USD to be able to test on a small case basis that your target market essentially is available to be able to pay. And then on the back of that, you can sort of lever up working with other institutions as ourselves and even the banks as the case may be. So what I'm saying in a nutshell is that I think there are various avenues and opportunities that you can lever as you stay active in this space and as you sort of keep contact with various organizations that are providing one element of value into the sector or the other. And as we do that, we can ultimately thrive and sort of push this sector to continue to deliver the benefits we know it can deliver as we work together as a group. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yuki. We'll come to Mr. Suleiman, and I can assure you that at the end of this session, you might just be getting so much knocks on your renewable energy support desk. So your final comments to participants and everyone.
And thank you. Let me start with a general comment to everyone listening. We all need to develop. Sorry, my video was out. Can you see me now?
Not yet. Okay, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to start with a general comment to everyone that we all need to develop an energy conscience. We cannot continue to generate energy the way we do right now if you have a conscience. And that change has to start with the individual. So if today all your energy is coming from fossil fuel, you need to do something about it and do it quickly. And it's not that difficult. You can start with one panel at a time. You can start with some solar powered street lightings in front of your house. There are things you can do to immediately begin to reduce your carbon footprint, and it's a must. You must have an energy conscience. But the conversation around renewable for me will never be one that would be purely about climate change and what we need to do. It's a commercial conversation. And so I'm again speaking to all the operators here, anyone involved in the value chain for renewable energy, that there are a lot of opportunity available that you have not explored. All you need to do is think about four things. The first one you must think about is you need to think about the commercial, the market you are going to serve. You need to be sure that you can combine your inputs, which is the ability to generate power, create an output that will be commercially viable, and you need to demonstrate that. The second thing you must do is you must think about your own capacity, your operational capacity to implement the project that will take you from imported components and the labor that you bring on board and create an output. Make sure that you can demonstrate that ability. Then the third thing you must also think about is there has to be some capital, some skin in the game. You need to come to the table with some capital that you've already invested. That way there is a sense that you're committed. And then the credit will be available. I guarantee you that the credit will be available. My next push to that is I'm going to drive my system to run a credit bazaar where anybody who is in this process can come to the bazaar. And the same way you serve yourself when you're looking for equity funders, when you prepare your deck and you answer all the questions that investors will answer, you prepare yourself in the same way and see how the debt funders will then respond to your project. And hopefully a lot of you will leave that bazaar with funding guaranteed. And then the last comment for me is to the government. You cannot treat renewable energy as an afterthought. You cannot keep making the bulk of your investment in the energy of the past. You need to understand that every reasonable person has taken the view that the energy of the future is renewable. And we have a unique advantage to take the lead in investing in that because we have a gap in the legacy investment. So the resources that should go into legacy investment are resources we should very quickly migrate into the energy of the future, even if it is not as competitive as we would like today. It is clear that from what we've seen, that it will be far more competitive than continue to rely on coal or fossil fuel. So to my mind, I think everybody's got a role to play and we all just need to get going with it.
Many thanks to our panelists, Mr. Suleiman, thank you. Lasdiu, thank you. Robo Ibo, thank you. Yuki Eguasa, thank you very much. Engineer Benga Jiboy, very great. Thank you to you for taking part in this and sharing your insightful thoughts on the discourse. We'll go straight to the launch of our Renewable Energy Guide, and Chiwindu Inichi will do that. So Chiwindu, please.
Thank you so much to our panelists and participants. A lot has been said. I particularly have gained some insight by just listening to our participants. Just like Mr. Suleiman did say, renewable energy is the new energy. You know, is what eventually come to stay. And when you look at what is happening globally, you realize that there's a gradual shift from fossil fuels towards renewable. And when you consider the kind of investment that some of the big international oil companies are making, you find out that their budget for renewables have continued to rise because they too are preparing towards the energy shift. So it is on that backdrop that we have prepared a guide, essentially a guide that provides an overview of the Nigerian power sector, as well as the legal and regulatory framework applicable to the sector. However, what we've done is also to sort of provide some basic insight to renewable energy in Nigeria, with particular emphasis on applicable policies and guidelines. What we hope is that our participants will find the guide insightful, whether you're a key participant, whether you're active in the renewable energy sector, or you simply just want to gain some knowledge about the dynamics of the sector. This guide, it's for you. What we've just done is to prepare our guide, and we're hoping that as you go through it, you find some of the information there insightful. And what we plan to do is to make it available to all our participants. We're going to send copies of the guide to all our participants because I think it was Mr. Robo that mentioned that there's some people that come into the industry and have very little knowledge about the industry, and having a document that sort of takes you through the industry, like a starting point, it can be quite helpful. So we're hoping that you find that same help going through this document. For those of us who are not so knowledgeable about the industry, obviously our panelists are quite knowledgeable about the industry, but again, there could be one or two things that you pick out of it. So on that note, we'd like to launch our renewable energy guide, and we hope that our participants and whoever reads it will find it insightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chiwenda. And then we'll go over to Adebowale Adeni. Take the vote of thanks for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Temitokwe. It has been a very insightful session. So on behalf of all of us at Anderson, I express our appreciation to the panelists for sharing your wealth of experience and perspectives at this Renewable Energy Roundtable. The discussions have been very insightful, and the panelists have done a very good job in articulating the opportunities and challenges within the renewable energy sector, while making smart recommendations on how to foster growth. We also thank the attendees and the participants for making time out for this event. Our Renewable Energy Roundtable is an annual event, and our commitment at Anderson is to make it a platform for engaging in constructive discussions that would unlock the benefit for stakeholders across the value chain of the renewable energy sector in Nigeria. On this note, we have come to the end of this event. Please do have a good day.
Thank you, Debo. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for your time. Thank you to our participants as well.
Thank you for an excellent arrangement.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Thanks, Iki.
Bye.
Bye, Robo.
Okay, well done, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Debo.
I think we still have some of the participants